Good morning, Heritage. Maybe you drove in and you missed all the light poles wrapped in lights with wreaths and the 100-foot Christmas tree that's going up out here. And I'm actually speaking from inside of a Christmas present. Man, this place, all week long, as I would come in and out of campus, there are people, nameless, faceless, just working their fingers to the bone for no applause, for no credit, because we have 8 values around Heritage that, as the leadership, we try to live by. We talk about them every week. I literally have them plastered on my wall in my office, and one of them is we want to set the table well. So we want, when you come onto our campus, we want you to feel like you're right at home. And so if you're sitting in this auditorium, that's our hope and our prayer. If you're watching online, that you hope you get a sense and a feel that, hey, I'd like to actually walk in the doors one of these days because these folks care. And so nobody needs claps, nobody needs pats on the back, but I have to at least acknowledge that this is just fantastic. And these folks have set the table really well for us, and I'm so grateful to be a part of a church that lives from that kind of value. So if you're new here, my name's Mike. I'm new here too. For those of you that haven't been around 5 months, you may have missed the world's most awkward introduction to a church, because I hold that record now. So my friend Blake asked me to come here, and I said yes after some praying and talking, and my wife and I. And so he had me up on stage right here next to Carmen one day, and my wife and I sat there holding microphones and never spoke. 2 services in a row. So if you came to one and thought, oh, you probably spoke in the other one, no, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. And so therefore it was just awkward and weird. But Blake was just trying to honor me because he knows how much I don't like this. He knows that. As a matter of fact, your pastor, my pastor, promised if I said yes to this job, I would never have to do this. Yeah. He said that. So full disclosure, as we kind of begin, our pastor's not a truth teller. He's not. He's bigger than me, though, and so I waited until he was several countries away before I made that, massive statement to the entire congregation. But that's kind of where we are. And so I'm here, you're here, so we're gonna do this. Speaking of Blake, it couldn't be Christmas enough with all this. Our pastor had to actually be in Bethlehem. He made the trip special for us, and so he's got a word from Bethlehem for us this morning. This is real.
Hey, Heritage, it's me, Blake, and you won't believe this. I'm in Bethlehem, and I'm actually at the site where the shepherds would have been when the angel arrived to tell them about the coming Messiah. And so people don't know what this really looks like, but these are actually, check out this cave. This is so awesome. This is where David would have been when he was taking care of his sheep. And this is where the shepherds would have been when they see this bright light and they're fearful for their lives. And they hear about this coming Messiah who's here to actually change the world. And think about this. The Bethlehem actually means the house of bread. And so what a cool thought to know that the bread of life was going to be born here in Bethlehem where these sheep were, right? And he's also the blood of the Lamb, right? The atoning sacrifice, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world was born here in Bethlehem. So man, what a time to celebrate the joy of the world that Jesus arrived here on earth. And so, Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope you have an amazing series. It's going to be great. We're going to talk about the great I am. He is. He never was, and he always will be. Let's celebrate Jesus.
Man, I wish he could get excited. So maybe today you showed up and you didn't even know it was the beginning of a Christmas series. I would even take a risk to say there's some of you out there, if you would have known it was the beginning of a Christmas series, you wouldn't have came. And there's a reason for that. But I want to talk a little bit about this series. We're going to announce those 4 names when the prophet Isaiah talked about those. But I want to talk about it in this way. I'm not a promoter. Blake is really good at that. I'm not good at that. I like being behind the stage, not on the stage. But I will also say that this isn't hype. This is real. The invitations that you saw that just fell apart here, because I've been bending them back and forth, we are asking you to take a risk. We'd love for your friends, neighbors, coworkers that don't attend church on a regular basis to come to the next couple of services. We would love that. But we especially are setting the table for Christmas Eve. It's going to be a fantastic service. You're not going to be sorry. I really promise. There's elements that are going into this that I literally can't wait. It's the thing about Christmas I am most excited about this year, is being in this place with y'all on Christmas Eve. And so we're giving you 4 of them. If you've got 8 friends you'll take a risk, take 2. But we really want to ask you to fill this place up so that the King can be celebrated on Christmas Eve. And everybody's working really hard to make sure that you're not sorry that you did that. And so that's what's coming. But I want to tell you that when Blake asked if I would lead this off, and I said no, and then he said, yes, you will, I began thinking, like, he is. Like, that seems a bit of a presumptuous place to start. Maybe all of you haven't been going to church all of your life, and maybe that's a bit of a stretch. And so I wrote what I'm going to say more for you than for the one that, like, already within their lips, it's like he is. Not so much that, more. So I thought maybe we could even change the title just for a little bit, and we could kind of flip this thing around to what I really want to speak to today. And maybe you're sitting there at a Christmas service and you think, is he? Like, it's just a small little flip, but boy, is it a different thing to say. Instead of a proclamation, it's a genuine question, and I have to believe in a crowd this size, many of you might have that. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about is he? I want to start by doing something maybe you wouldn't have expected. I want to start by a couple of Christmas songs. So unlike Blake, I can't sing, and so we're going to play a little music. And so if you know it, can you just help, like, fill in the blanks when you hear the blanks?
Have yourself
Oh, nice. Yeah. You do not disappoint. Thank you so much. I needed that help so much. I won't say which service was the best. Can we just, though, acknowledge that for some of you, this is not a merry time of the year? It's not the most wonderful time. Can I tell you that on college campuses across the United States, it's not the cafeteria that has the longest line. It's the mental health facility this time of the year. There's more antidepressant drugs given out during our holiday season than any other 5 months combined. Can I tell you there was a study done a year ago that of Americans, thousands of them, big study, clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, that says this: there's a new phenomenon in the United States. They've named it. It's very difficult to explain, but basically is people aren't happy this time of the year because they think they're supposed to be this happy, but they're only this happy. So that makes them sad. They're not as happy as they're supposed to be because everything around them's happy. TV's happy, commercials are happy, stores are happy, everybody's happy. And so then when that makes them even more sad, and it's called a holiday darkness spiral. We just keep spiraling. Why wouldn't it be the most wonderful time of the year? I mean, for me, personally, just sharing from my heart, like, 2 of my family members that made Christmas what Christmas was to me is no longer with us. That's hard for me. I want to think about Christmas, and I want those people to be a part of that. And when they're not, that's not easy for me. And for some of us, it's just, it's that pressure. We talk about it every year. It's that shopping, and you got to make sure, like, if you even have the money to do it, then you make sure it's even, and the people you're doing that for feel super known, and it's hard, and is it going to be here on time, and do I have to fight the lines? And then there's the family obligations, like, we've been invited here and here. Well, what if we go here? What will they think? And what if we go here? What will they think? You got to meet all those expectations. And then there's the emotional baggage that kind of comes with all the get-togethers, like the 1 or 2 you actually want to go to than the other ones. But you have to go. And then December, what a huge financial burden for many of y'all. The past 11 years, we've outspent ourselves year after year after year. Every year we've spent more than the previous year. Until this year, December 2019, it is projected for the first time in the history of this little experiment called the United States, we will spend $1 trillion on holiday spending. Man, the weight and change of carrying that kind of debt. Of course, for many of you, this is not the most wonderful time of the year. It's hard. And you're supposed to feel wonderful, and then you don't, so it makes you feel worse. and so you're in that spiral. I want to talk about that today a little bit. Because I thought it was supposed to be all about Jesus, right? And all that stuff we just talked about, like, really isn't. Well, it was supposed to be about that. And about 800 years before this little baby was born that we're about to celebrate, God's people were experiencing some pretty difficult times. And his spokesman, Isaiah, was kind of the mouthpiece of God's people in that time. And he said some things that I'm going to say, and if you've been around the church any at all, especially this time of the year, they're going to be very familiar words to you. But before I tell you those words that are so familiar, let me just quickly set the scene that in the day that he said these words, God's chosen people had an enemy, and they were called the Assyrians, and they were out to get those folks. They were literally dragging them out of their homes, putting them in captivity, and abusing them in horrific ways. So when the original hearers of this, what I'm about to read, so I know that you're sitting in a comfortable chair in a climate-controlled building, having just had some decent coffee, probably in a little breakfast, and now lunch is on your way. That's not how the first people that have heard these words would have heard these words. So if you could put yourself more on a dirt floor with your doors locked shut, hearing your neighbors being drug out, listening to you and your child's bellies growling because you can't get out to get food or water, like that's the ears that would have heard these words the first time. And so these were folks without hope. So because that you are in a chair that's soft, in a building that's climate controlled, doesn't mean you aren't without hope. So I hope that these words that this spokesman of God said could mean something to you like they certainly meant to the people 800 years before the birth of the Christ. And he says, Isaiah says, "For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." Familiar, I know, but try to put those ears on, and then let me break it down a little bit further. What would you have felt if you were in that room when Isaiah was making that proclamation, when he said, "To us"? You would have heard this. It may be bad, but we're all still together. We're all still together. You know, my wife and I felt what it felt like for the first time in a long time to be separated, alone. When we came here, we didn't know anybody. And so if you're in this room, or if you're on that screen and are considering coming in this room, I wanted just to take a step away from Isaiah just for a minute and to give a personal testimony that the people in this church have been so incredibly wonderful, pun intended, to my wife and I. So inclusive, so willing to listen and share their lives. And so if you're in that spot of feeling isolated, and when you longing to hear a person say us, where you get to belong in a group, I'm saying take a risk. We did, and it paid off. So Isaiah then goes on and says, a child. Well, again, in our day and age, that's still a big deal. We get excited when someone's about to have a baby, but in that day, the spokesman of God is saying, for us, to us, the divine is giving a gift of a child. Okay, now they're in. All right, Isaiah. Well, like, what kind of child? A son. Again, I have 2 daughters. I celebrated their births big. That's how we do it. In the day this was written, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, in a patriarchal society, a son meant your name gets to carry on. To us, a reminder we're together. Hope of a divine gift. Our name gets to get carried on. And then the government. That's kind of the problem in this day and age. It is the problem. And this new son is going to literally take the government, throw it over his shoulder, and carry it. There's this hope coming into this. And then lastly, because if you were in that room and you were hearing that proclamation and you were getting on the edge of your seat and closer, and you're like, yes, we are together. There is a promise. It is a son. What are they going to name him? Because naming was big. You became your name. What are they going to name him? And so today we talk about Wonderful Counselor. Well, of all the four, I didn't really want this one. I don't use the word wonderful ever. I don't even think wonderful is wonderful. Like if someone asked, how was your awesome vacation? I would never say, it's wonderful. Like that word doesn't have any weight and gravity like it did. So I got to thinking about it though. I thought, well, but since I've been in Georgia, have I received any wonderful counsel? And I have. I literally could go on and on. I thought, I have to narrow this down to a couple, and so I did. So one of the reasons that I was called to serve here at Heritage is that I've had a lot of experience dealing with finances. And as Blake has shared from this stage, with transparency and honesty, church was in a pretty bad spot financially. And so that was one of the things. And so when I got here in July, one of the first things I did was, again, digging in. So spreadsheets and bottom lines and numbers and figuring out and asking questions and can you help me understand? And the more I dug, I don't feel like I came into this job with any arrogance, but I did come with confidence. Like I can do this. I have what it takes to help. That was quickly diminished and gone. I felt so little, so small, so I do not have what it takes. I cannot help. It's bigger than me. It was that bad. Maybe some of you know. It was that bad. And so there's a couple people in the church that sort of have their heads around the money most, and I called a meeting and said, I need to sort of tell you. And I honestly didn't know if I was going into that room sort of with a position of resignation. I'd just been here, but like, I can cut the grass, I think, but I can't do that. It's too big. And they listened, and they listened, and they listened, and they listened, and I kept talking, and I kept talking, I did. I laid out a very honest but very ugly, dark picture. And one of the persons in the room happened to be one of the elders. And after he listened, and I finally talked and felt like I had thoroughly depressed us all, he smiled and he slapped my knee. He said, Mike, you need to know something about Heritage Christian Church. And I quote, God ain't never been early here, but he ain't never been late. It's going to be okay. The faith of him transferred into me. Nothing changed. All the numbers were still in parentheses for all you accountants. That's not good. It was bad. But I was like, it's going to be okay. It was the faith of this man that just looked at me and slapped my leg and helped me realize I'm looking through the wrong set of eyes here. That was wonderful counsel, and I needed it. The second one was this. It was the second weekend we were here. First weekend, again, didn't know anybody. We sat right there. I'm just going to be honest, right? It's okay. I'm not being mean, but like, it was first service. It was me and 9 others. I mean, it was no one here. My wife, she doesn't know I'm going to say this, leaned over, whispered in my ear, honey, do we have to come to church here? That's how it felt. And I go, I think so. Second week we come back and we don't know anybody. And I'm helping in the middle school now. Bunch of great volunteers. Tanner hadn't showed up yet. That's over. Krista's working in the children's area. And as I walk on the sidewalk, I realize I don't know anybody. I don't have nobody to sit with. I mean, I know Blake, but I don't think he wants me to sit here. So I got to find Krista. I need Krista. So I walk down the hallway and I get close to those double doors. I know now I can't walk past those double doors without getting tackled. I understand. But I didn't know that then. I was innocent mistake to walk through double doors, even though I didn't have any children back there. And right at check-in, there's this little 4 or 5-year-old boy. And he sees me. And this boy lights up. I mean, eyes light, and then he starts running. And I'm like, I don't know who this is, but this feels great. And I just go, hey, buddy, like that. And he starts putting on the brakes until he gets about right here. And he realizes I was not who he thought he was. And here's his wonderful counsel. He said, you got bad breath and your pants are too tight. One of your kids said that to me. Turns out Maxwell House coffee and staff lunches was something I needed to have a talking to about. And so there's been some wonderful counsel around here for sure. When we talk about counselors, though, there's like a little bit of a stigma. So I'm not going to say, hey, show your hands if everybody's got a counselor. I'm not doing that. But like, I think there's a stigma for a reason. Counsel can be great. The Proverbs and Psalms have all kinds of things to say about it. I think this is kind of the message, though, that we get from media about counselors that sort of ruin it for us.
I don't know, our relationship's just kind of boring.
You're not alone. I used to have a limited selection of shows on demand, and let me tell you, it got very boring. I got DirecTV last week, and they have more than 50,000 titles to choose from.
But what about my problems?
Classic narcissist.
What was that?
Nothing.
TV without 50,000 titles on demand is just kind of TV. Get
Classic
DirecTV to your
narcissist.
$200 reward card. Don't just kind of TV, DirecTV.
One more.
Switching to Geico really save you 15% or more on car insurance? Does a former drill sergeant make a terrible therapist?
And that's why yellow makes me sad, I think.
That's interesting. You know what makes me sad?
You do! Maybe we should chug on over to Mamby-Pamby land, where maybe we can find some self-confidence for you, you jackwagon!
Tissue?
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
I think we can all agree that's not the kind of wonderful counsel that we're talking about. But Isaiah, the spokesman of God, speaking to God's people, he was given this title indicating more of the kind of character this king was going to have than just its name. The literal translation of wonderful is what throws us off a little bit. It's what threw me off. I'm like, wonderful counselor. I wanted more. I wanted more Prince of Peace. I get that. Well, wonderful translated properly is incomprehensible and full of wonder. You can't get your mind around it. So I think it might be helpful to all of us that have heard wonderful counselor our whole life and not understood, for most of us, I didn't understand the weight and gravity that word would have had when the original author speaks it and when the original hearers heard it. We go back a little bit in the Bible to the book of Judges. And then it's the story of Samson. And for those that have been around church a lot, Samson's like kind of this iconic image of strength, at the long hair and the bulging muscles. And he did things like killed lions with his hands and wiped out an entire army with the jawbone of a donkey, like just strength. Well, Samson's dad asked God a question. It was a simple, honest question. God's answer was weird. The question was as simple as, what is your name? Not a bad question, right? But God's answer is, why do you ask me my name, since my name is so wonderful? What? So if you translate it right, God would be saying, why would you ask my name, since my name is so far beyond anything you could possibly understand? It's incomprehensible. So when we hear wonder, we hear kind of good. These folks heard, oh wow, that's a different kind of name. So as we prepare to celebrate the birth of this new king, I wanted to do so by asking some questions. And the first one, if I was sitting in a seat like that, in a season like this, and I wasn't convinced that he is, but I was more like, is he? Maybe the first question I would ask is, what makes him so wonderful? So I want to answer that by first turning to the 4th chapter of Matthew. Verse 23 says, and he, meaning Jesus, went throughout all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and healing every affliction from among the people. So he was wonderful in a way that's impossible to understand, in that this was a sick land and he brought health. No one else had done that. That's hard to get your mind around when you're surrounded by disease and now you're surrounded by health. Mark also speaks to that in the 1st chapter, verse 22, when he says that his teaching was wonderful. He says, and they were astonished at Jesus' teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. Now, Mark wasn't throwing shade on the scribes. The scribes were teachers, but this guy, this wonderful cat, he teaches and taught in a way that was so incomprehensible, hard to get your mind around. And then Hebrews 4 tells us in verse 15 that his life was wonderful. We don't have a high priest, this is referring to Jesus, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. In about 6 minutes, I'm coming back to that verse. So I'm aware I'm going to read it twice, but I really think we missed something when we read that verse. Before I do, I wanted just to say for me personally, what the most wonderful thing, as I've continued to try and follow this king the majority of my life now, the most wonderful in a mind-blowing way is that he's so countercultural and he's so counterintuitive. He doesn't say things that make sense to me. He says things like, blessed are you when you mourn. He says, like, rejoice and be glad in your persecution. And then it gets worse because he says, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Ah, that's wonderful in a way I have a hard time getting my mind around. I want to end, though, our time together by hopefully answering the question, is he? Is he? Because if you're here and you're a little bit selfish, we all are, you could be saying, is he able to help me? Like, I hear the stories, but is he able to help me? Well, according to John, this is such a good piece of scripture, John 2:25, he, meaning Jesus, says he did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Can you imagine how effective your therapist could be? If when you sat down from the first second, they already knew every thought, every emotion, all your past experiences, your current circumstances, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, they were just right there, accessible. Boom, they're there. Because don't you know that's what therapy is? It's just another person spending months or years trying to figure all those things out. And we have a king that knows everything that's in you already. Well, the Apostle Paul then tells us in Colossians 2, when you take that truth and you pair it with this truth, you can answer the question, well, just because he knows what's in me, is he able to do anything for me? And Colossians 2 says, Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So now we have this wonderful counselor that knows every single thing that's in you and at the same time has access to all of the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And what better counselor could you find? That's what makes him wonderful. But then maybe as we continue in this string of questions, maybe you're saying, but is he able to understand my situation? Maybe he is, but then could he offer even me grace? Because you don't know who I really am. I got some stuff y'all don't know about. And maybe you think once the veil is open and he sees really what's in your heart. And that's why I want to go back to Hebrews. We read this scripture often if you're around the church often, but we never conclude with the end, and it just leaves you hanging. And so I want to say it again. We don't have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace in our time of need. So this is kind of the point of me talking this morning. If you're here and you have some kind of need, if you find yourself in some kind of need, not only do we have a king that's able to understand our weaknesses, he's also been tempted in every way we've been tempted, and yet he continues to walk this straight and perfect path. So he's by example awesome, but he's also, at the same time, knows everything that's in you, and at the same time has all wisdom and all knowledge. And at the same time, he says, I went from this really dirty, humble stable to now I have been elevated to a throne. What kind of throne? Well, a throne of grace. A throne of grace that seats a wonderful counselor. And so in this season, with all of these things against us, against our joy, if we could just pause. And this group of people, 800 years before the birth of Christ, he proclaims there's a child coming. It's a son. He's going to take care of the government. His name is Wonderful Counselor. Here's my hope today, is that as so a couple months ago, Blake helped you understand the all you all. We Isaiah says, to us, so we feel included. We as one church could proclaim with one voice, He is. Not with a question, although if you have them, that's okay. We could switch that around and we could say, He is. He is wonderful. He is a mighty God. And if you find yourself feeling alone, afraid, isolated, like that's, as I prayed, as I wrote, that's who I wrote this for. Like that's a terrible thing to be anytime, but in this time of the year, it's why we're in that dark spiral, because we're not connected, we're isolated, we're alone, and we think that's what's going to help us, and it's actually the worst possible thing. So I'll challenge you, an easy challenge, and then a harder one. If you're feeling that way, if you're feeling isolated, and you don't feeling known and appreciated and understood, then at the least, grab a program, tear off that little piece, write your name and your contact information, and then just say, I need this, and then fill in the blank. Put it in a giving box, and somebody from this place wants to connect with you. They don't want you to feel that way. It's not our desire. Secondly, it's a little harder. For an introvert, walking across the room is very hard. But maybe today, it feels that bad, you take that risk. So when we're done here, and the worship team leads us again, and they dismiss us, I would encourage you, if you want a little bit more risk, find a kind face. They're all over this place. Krista and I will tell you, they're all over this place. Now, there's some angry ones, just walk past those. Just walk right past them. But find a kind face and just say, do you have a minute? And then proclaim your name, my name, and then proclaim your need. I need. That's scary. You know what's worse? Alone. Even when a 5-year-old boy you don't even know, it felt so good for a short time. Next week, Blake will be back from Israel. He's going to talk to us about the significance of him being named Mighty God. I want to encourage you to do whatever you need to do to try to be back, because I know what he's going to say. It's really good. And it's leading to somewhere even better. And so if you could clear your schedule, if we could make that bold ask, and you could be in the same room as one church, that would be fantastic. I'm going to pray here in a minute, and then I want to invite you to a table, a different table, one that wasn't set by amazing volunteers, but one was set by a wonderful counselor. When he laid out his life for us, and after I pray, I'm going to invite, if you're new here and you're not perfect, but you are welcome, and who knows what can happen. It's out on the wall now. You should see it. It's what we hope happens here. You're trying to follow Jesus the best you can. You call him your Lord and Savior, and you want to go to one of these tables, and you want to enjoy a meal that was prepared by this King of Kings who's a wonderful counselor. When you take that little piece of bread, would you just do what he asked? Would you just remember? Will you remember what he did, why he did it? You know, you take that little cup of juice that represents his blood. Will you just remember how difficult of an assignment it was for him to have to endure, but his willingness to do so, and how that changed everything? And could you do that together? And then when you're done, can you celebrate the Lord together? And then when you're done, can you just have a kind face? Because you never know. There might be somebody here today willing to take a big risk. Pray with me. Jesus, you are our wonderful counselor. You are mighty God. You have no beginning. You have no end. You are everlasting. And so now we remember you. Remember that you did come, that you are wonderful, and that you are mighty, and you have no end. And by your broken body and your shed blood, today we call you Prince of Peace. And it's in your name we pray. And amen.